The Patriots Beat podcast here on the CLNS Media Podcast Network. I'm Evan Lazar, joined as always by Alex Barth, and today we are going to do a live Q&A edition of the show. So go right ahead, you know the drill, and ask your questions in the chat, and we'll get to as many as we can over the next half an hour, 45 minutes or so. We'll do the Boston Sportsman at the end, and we'll talk about the Celtics or lament about the Celtics a little bit towards the end of the show. But we're going to start with Patriots as we always do. So if you have questions, get them in the chat, and we will answer as many as we possibly can here for the next 30 plus minutes or so. But I wanted to start as people file in and start to ask questions, Alex, with I guess the news of the week so far, which was Jakobi Meyers officially.
Tristan Vizcaino.
Jakobi Meyers officially signing his 1-year RFA tender on Monday. Meyers talked to us last week at minicamp, said that he was going to go back and deliberate with his agent, Drew Rosenhaus, and kind of figure out what his best path forward was, but that they were hoping to maybe hammer out an extension to avoid playing on the tender. It didn't sound like it got close enough to any point where Meyers was going to push off signing the tender. There was also a deadline for June 15th. They could have lowered the salary if he hadn't signed it by then. I don't know if the Patriots would have gone that route in good faith. It's not exactly the way that you have a good faith negotiation, but it was something that they would have in their back pocket at that point in time. Not a surprise that Meyers has signed the tender, but looking forward to possibly extending Jakobi Meyers beyond this season. I think it's an interesting conversation to have about his value, not just to the Patriots, but relative to the rest of the league. And we've seen the Christian Kirks of the world and the wide receiver market get a little bit nutty. You especially look at some of the deals that guys like Marquez Valdez-Scantling, Russell Gage, Zay Jones, those are some of those mid-tier wide receivers that signed in the last calendar year here in the 2022 free agency period. They're all getting $8 to $10 million a year in terms of average annual value, somewhere between $12.5 to $20 million of that being guaranteed. A pretty nice payday for Jakobi Meyers to go from a UDFA to making a deal that's worth a total value of potentially $30 million over 3 seasons. But the question is for the Patriots, and that we're going to present here on the show, should the Patriots be interested in signing a long-term extension with Jakobi Meyers that is pushing the $10 million per year mark? Because that's the number, right? That's where his market is going to be. I think that's where Drew Rosenhaus is going to try to get, is that 3 for 30 figure is kind of the ceiling of his market. But at the minimum, he's looking at $20 to $24 million total over a 3-year period. Are you in on that for Jakobi Meyers or not?
What was give me your number again exactly, because you just said a million numbers.
I would say that his floor is 3 for 24. His ceiling is 3 for 30.
So what was the Renfro deal again?
The Renfro deal was over 30. I think he got 3 for 36. I want to say
3 for 36. So here's the thing to me. If you're gonna, so you said 8 to 10 million, like that's a big difference to me. 8 per, yeah, that's probably about right. I do think he still has value.
I got to correct it. The Renfro got 2 for 32.
2 for 32. Okay, so
his number was 16.
So I'll say why I brought that up in a second.
Yeah.
Like to me, Meyers is like the 7 to 8 range. It's like the top end of his range. When you're getting a 10, you're pushing it because the lack of versatility. Would kill Jakobi Meyers is his lack of yard after catch ability. Now, if he comes out this year and it turns out the muscle he added makes him much better after the catch, completely different story. The reason I bring up the Renfro deal, though, and I wouldn't do 2 over 32 for Jakobi. I wouldn't. But if you look at the numbers, overall, between Jakobi Meyers and Hunter Renfro, they're actually very comparable, especially when you do it on a per-game basis. However, that's skewed because Jakobi Meyers didn't do a ton his rookie year, but his last 2 years have been pretty much equal. He's been relatively the same player, very consistent.
Yeah.
Hunter Renfro didn't really do much until last year. He had a breakout year. He doubled his catches, nearly doubled his yards. So here's the thing. When you go to the negotiating table, Jakobi Meyers is going to put down, well, here's the numbers over the last 2 years. I am comparable to this player.
Yeah.
So I deserve comparable money. Whereas the Patriots are going to say, well, let's just look at last year. You're not comparable. And that's going to be the sticking point. And generally the players win those conversations, because some team somewhere is going to buy into, well, Jakobi Meyers has been more consistent and maybe he still has untapped potential. And we like that. I don't think the Patriots would be that team because they're generally not that team. But that's where it gets interesting to me. I look at him, $8 million per year is probably about right. Because again, I think he still does have value, but especially if the Patriots are going to do this whole Shanahan thing on offense, they need guys who can create after the catch. And he's not that kind of receiver. He ceases to be a scheme fit if they're going to go that way. And you're not going to pay somebody that kind of money who is potentially going to get schemed out of your system. So that's where I'm at with Jakobi right now. I think this is a big year for him. I say this all, if you're taking notes on what I'm saying to try to cold take me, write it in pencil. I'm saying this all in pencil. This is all subject to change. But as we sit here today, that's how I feel about it.
I have concerns about extending Jakobi Meyers for too much money, because you mentioned the yards after catch. I have the stat right here from Pro Football Focus. I looked up receivers that had over 100 targets last year. So we're talking about high volume guys, right? 100 plus targets. There was 37 of them. And yards after catch per reception on average, Jakobi Meyers was 36th out of 37 receivers in yards after catch per reception. And yards per route run, so just taking the amount of routes that he ran divided it by yards, he was 31st out of 37 in that high volume category. So it's very clear to me that Meyers is not a high volume guy. Is he a nice slot receiver? Is he maybe somebody that is better used or better suited in a good offense to the amount of targets that, let's say, Danny Amendola used to get, as kind of that predominant slot guy, but not the full-time Z receiver that was Julian Edelman, right? Amendola was sort of that secondary option inside. Is he a useful player in that role? I think so. But I think in terms of him being a 100-plus target guy for your offense, what the stats show you is that he is one of the least efficient high-volume guys in the entire NFL in terms of how much yards he actually puts out relative to the targets and the receptions that he gets. It's a role that has inherently, for 20-plus years, just put out all sorts of production, from Troy Brown to Deion Branch to Welker to Edelman, now to Meyers. You play the slot in New England, you're going to catch 80-plus balls, you're going to have over 800 yards, and you're going to push 1,000. Like, that's just, you show up and that's what's going to happen. I think they can get better players inside than Jakobi Meyers. And if I'm Jakobi Meyers, I want to get this done before the start of the season, because I look at some of the other weapons that they now have in their offense. Kendrick Bourne, Devontae Parker, if Trey Nixon makes this football team, getting more targets for guys like Hunter Henry and Johnny Smith. Is he going to have the same target share that he had last year? Is he going to have 126 targets again next year with all these guys in their second seasons with the Patriots, or guys that they're going to try to implement now? I think there's going to be less opportunity for Jakobi Meyers in this offense as well this year. So if I'm Jakobi, like you said, you put down that Hunter Renfrow contract. I think Russell Gage got from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers 3 over 30 with $20 million guaranteed. That's a nice deal to sort of work off of. His production has been better than Gage's. It was better last year than Russell Gage's was, but they're comparable level players. If I'm Meyers, I'm trying to get the Patriots to give me that deal now. If I'm the Patriots, I'm more than content in letting him play for $4 million this year. I think that's the way that they're going to end up going, because, like I said, everybody kind of expects him to have an even better season than last year. I think the targets are going to go elsewhere, right? I think Bourne's going to see more targets. Parker's certainly going to be now involved in the offense. I think his numbers are going to take a dip, and then he's going to take a dip in the wallet when he tries to negotiate a contract next offseason. I like Jakobi Meyers. He's done everything right. He's worked hard. He's the consummate Patriot way type player, right? UDFA, right. Carves out a role, becomes a starter, but I'm not sure that he's ever going to maximize that role any more than he already has. Is he going to ever be better than this with the athletic profile and with the yard after catch profile that he has. Like, he's not going to all of a sudden become a much better athlete that can get in and out of contact and create explosive plays and run after the catch, right? I just don't know if he's ever going to be that type of guy. And at this point, you probably would have seen more of a feel and stuff like that of that happening.
Yeah, the other thing I would say too, this isn't exactly how things work, but let's do a fun little thought exercise here.
Yeah.
The Patriots have, the thing with the Patriots receiver core right now, and there's positives and negatives to this. They have a bunch of number twos, right? They've got a bunch of supporting, role players. They don't have that star wide receiver, and maybe they'll make that work. But you kind of look at, okay, how's the roster going to evolve? And you budget X amount of money for the wide receiver position. If Meyers is $4 million right now. Let's say that just comes off the books next year. Then you have Nelson Aguilar at $14 million. That comes off the book. Would you rather give, so that's $18 million you have to play with, right?
Yeah.
Let's say you give 10 of that to Jakobi Meyers at wide receiver. What are you really getting with 8? Right? Versus you could have $18 million worth of wide receiver money coming off the books. What does an $18 million wide receiver look like? I mean, I'm just looking at it right here.
Well, now it looks like Christian Kirk, so that could be a problem. But other than that, it's...
Well, no, Brandon Cooks got 19.8.
Right. Yeah.
Amari Cooper got 20 if you stretch a little bit. That's a low-end number one, but that's a number one.
Yeah.
So, also, I think teams realize Christian Kirk's absurd. Yeah. I think that's its own thing, right? Heck, Allen Robinson got 15.5.
Yeah.
So you're kind of in the right ballpark there. If you take Aguilar and Meyers out, if you let those guys walk and you put that money into one receiver, that's a legitimate upgrade.
Yeah. That's sort of how I feel about it. I just would be wary of giving Jakobi Meyers anything over $8 million a year. I think if they're willing to have a hometown discount of some sort and he's willing to take a little bit less to stay in New England, then that's a different animal. But if he's going to try to cash out, as he rightfully should, I'm not saying he shouldn't go out and try to get all the money that he possibly can. But if he's going to go that route, I would probably let some other team pay him if he's going to get $8, $9, $10 million a year on the free agent market. You mentioned some other, use that $18 million and kind of resurface it to somebody else. Look, I'll continue to say it. If Washington's shopping Terry McLaurin, like, that's the guy, right? Like that. Those are the types of guys that you would love to see New England try to get their hands on and maybe reallocate some of those resources from Meyers and Aguilar and even Parker, I think, has an out if it doesn't work out, or if they want to try to free up even more money at wide receiver. They got plenty of money next offseason, so that's not a problem, right? That's going to be easy to do next offseason. So we'll see what happens there. Let's get to some of these questions, but I think that the Meyers conversation, it's one of those tricky ones because he's such a consummate Patriot. He did everything the right way. He carved out his role. He outperformed N'Keal Harry, the first-round pick in 2019, gets outperformed by the street free agent. We've seen this happen all the time at corner, right? Like J.C. Jackson outperforming Jawan Williams, right? It's like sort of the same thing. But it's just not a player that just like with JC, I don't necessarily see them overextending for Jakobi Meyers, right? I think they kind of know what those guys' ceilings are and where the kind of the cap is of a player like that. Want to talk offensive line? Let's talk offensive line because out of anything, when we're looking at the offense right now, as Ashley asks here, what do you make of the new O-line configuration? I actually really liked, and I get it's mini camp, I get it's June, I get it's not padded practices, all that kind of stuff aside. I actually liked some of the things that we saw from the Patriots offense last week. I thought Mack threw the ball really well. I thought some of these new receivers, Parker, Trey Nixon is a real thing. That looked really good out there for 2 days. The O-line worries me a little bit because there's a ton of moving parts, right? It's just, you're flipping sides with your tackles. You got 2 new starting guards. Pretty much the only guy that is in the same spot that you feel really confident about is David Andrews at center. What do we make of the O-line configuration? Do we feel like this line has the potential to be better than the line last year? Because last year, by all consensus, Patriots had a top 5, top 10 offensive line in football last year, especially towards the end of the season once they put Ted Karras in and got Trent Brown back. this line, it feels like there's a lot of uncertainty and question marks heading into training camp.
Yeah, I like Trent at left tackle. I wanted that since they re-signed him. I'm a big fan of that. I still think Michael Onwenu is a better tackle than he is guard. I still believe that. So, you're getting closer. If you move Onwenu out now, who's going to play right guard? I was really high on Jason Hines. It appears like he's not ready to get on the field.
Yeah.
Is it Arlington Hambright? Is it Drew Desjardins? Who knows, right? But yeah, it's I'm optimistic. I'm not there yet. I think there's still questions, but I think there's tremendous value in having Trent Brown at left tackle. I really do. There's also, but like you said, there's so many unknowns. Like, what's Cole Strange going to be, right? So call it cautiously optimistic.
So there's not a given that any of these players are going to be upgrades, right? That's the concern that I have.
Trent Brown is.
Trent Brown's an upgrade if he's healthy. I guess.
Okay.
There's also a health wild card, to be fair. So it's not like I'm saying that Isaiah Wynn's any more of a security blanket over there, but Trent Brown hasn't been healthy since 2018 for the full season. He's missed time in the last 3 seasons. You put on top of that Cole Strange looked great in shorts, right? Like, looks like athletic, can really move. I think that they can implement some of the blocks and some of the things that they do with him on that left side, screens to his side, outside zone runs to his side, getting him out and getting him into the second and third level of the defense. He can really run, and he's a really good athlete. He looked thin, I thought, and you kind of look at some of the concerns down at the Senior Bowl and what other scouts had concerns about him. Play strength, pass protection technique, raw in that regard. I am not 100% sold that Cole Strange is going to be an immediate upgrade over Shaq Mason or Ted Karras, right? I think that there's a lot of things that he will do better than those two out of the gate, which is probably more about the athleticism stuff I was just talking about and being able to get out and move. But in terms of steady consistency, week in and week out, I don't know if he's going to be as solid as those guys were. You mentioned Onwenu maybe better at tackle than he is at guard. His tackle tape is probably better than his NFL guard tape at this point. I still think his body type, and I still think ideally he develops as a guard, and maybe with more experience at guard, it goes that direction. But you still have to have some development there from Mike Onwenu to then say that he's better than Shaq Mason is at right guard. And then there's the Isaiah Wynn question, which we've talked about a lot on the show already. I still think, and this is just my tinfoil hat conspiracies here going on a little bit, but I still think that they're having Isaiah Wynn play right tackle because they're really seriously considering moving him before the start of the season. And then, like I said last show, you're not displacing 2 spots. You're only moving on from 1 spot, right? And you kind of know what you're going to get in the other 4 spots. But if you have 2 tackles that are flipped, you have 2 new guards, and you have Matt Patricia and Billy Yates as your offensive line coaches, I'm more confident in Billy Yates, quite frankly, coaching the offensive line at that point. But there's a lot of question marks, and if there's one thing that you look at with young quarterbacks across the league, and even quarterbacks that succeed like Joe Burrow, Patrick Mahomes, when they don't get protected, all these quarterbacks look average, right? Like, that's just the nature of the beast. We've talked about not ruining Mac's development so many times on the show over the last 6 months since Josh McDaniels left. Messing around with this offensive line is getting me worried, and more so than some of the other elements of, like, Joe Judge or the skill positions or whatever the case may be with the play caller. Getting Mac, acclimated behind his offensive line and making sure he's well protected, that masks a lot of these issues, because I'm confident in Mac's abilities, right? I think he can throw the football. I'm confident in his decision-making, his ability to make plays. Are they going to have the protection, and are they going to be able to make the adjustments and have the game plans necessary up front to keep Mac clean? It's a big concern of mine in terms of this offense. I think there's like 3 position groups, and we're going to kind of hit on the next one here, where I look at them and I say, this worries me a little bit. Offensive line, linebacker, corner, right? Like, I think those 3 spots are the potential landmines for the Patriots right now. And I put offensive line on that list. I still am concerned about that. The question here about the linebackers, I find it interesting. Jeff Howe had a report last week when he was out at Pat's camp about Dante Hightower and that door not being completely closed for the Patriots. Obviously, Van Noy is elsewhere, Windows elsewhere. Hightower is still a free agent. I don't think that that's completely been ruled out. I think what we're going to see is we had mini camp. Maybe there's a week or two of training camp, get through maybe the first preseason game. If the linebacking core is struggling at that point of the offseason, Alex, I still think that they might dial up Hightower and see if he'll come back as an emergency thing. If they're not getting out of Raekwon McMillan and Mac Wilson and Cameron McGrone what they really need out of that group. I'm optimistic that that group is going to provide some more athleticism. I still don't know how those puzzle pieces fit together, and I still think that they're keeping Hightower on the back burner just in case.
And I think, he presents value as a leader. I know I'm in the minority on this. I actually wouldn't hate seeing Dante Hightower come back for the right money. I think he provides tremendous value as a veteran presence. The other thing is he can do so much, that I don't know that you need him playing 80% of your snaps in the middle of your defense like he was last year. Like, he's probably past that point in his career. But you could bring him back and have him play edge rusher, use him as a situational edge rusher. And I think that's a role he could be, a contributor in. I really do. So I'm not ruling that out. The difference to me between the linebacker and the corner position is, and maybe why I'm not as worried about the linebackers, is there's so many guys there with potential, right? Yeah. Between Mac Wilson, Cameron McGrone, Raekwon McMillan. I think there's a lot of upside there. And then Josh Uche too is still sort of an unknown, but he's shown flashes. Are all four of those guys going to bust? I don't think so. I think at least one or two of those guys end up being contributors. There's too much talent there. I'm not saying, look, it's not Ray Lewis and Brian Urlacher and whoever, but there's too much talent there to get absolutely nothing out of that position. They're all young. They're all athletic too. That, there's enough athleticism too to kind of be a carrying trait, I think, in that group. Whereas at corner, you're counting on a 32-year-old Malcolm Butler who was just retired, and Jalen Mills, who's not a true corner, and then rookies and, special teams guys. It's different. I feel okay about the linebacker position. I think there's still sorting out. It's hardly cemented, but I think by the time and maybe even into September, honestly, it might not look great right away. But I think by the time we get to October, by the time we get to week 5, 6, I think there's a clear rotation or setup or whatever you want to call it at the linebacker position. I think it's functional. They're not going to be the 2000 Ravens. They're not going to be the 2002 Bucs. They're not going to be the 2014 Patriots.
Right.
But I think that they'll have a linebacker group that can compete in the NFL and help them win games. I feel good about that.
So I actually agree with you in terms of there's enough talent there that you like to think that one or two of those guys pan out, right? Like, all they need is one or two of them to pan out, because the reason why I would kind of put linebacker out of those three positions I mentioned, corner, line, and linebacker, I'm the least concerned about linebacker because you really only need two guys, right? You have Jawan Bentley, you know what his role is going to be, and you really only need like one more or really ideally two more, right, to stand out, to be able to give you something. It's not a position where you're going to be playing, 3, 4, 5, 6 guys in a game, right? Like, it's really not that type of spot anymore in today's NFL, especially when you talk about, okay, you have the safeties that can drop down, Duggar, Phillips, Jabril Peppers. Those guys are going to be playing on a lot of second and longs and third downs to begin with, and you're not going to have as many linebackers. So you're really just looking at like one or two of these guys to pop. You mentioned Uche, you mentioned McGrone. On-ball linebackers, though, some of these edge rushers, because that is what Van Noy and Hightower ultimately were. Were you a little surprised to see Anthony Jennings like in the mix during minicamp? I know you've been the one that hasn't given up on Anthony Jennings the most out of the two of us, right? So maybe you weren't surprised. Anthony Jennings doesn't seem like an afterthought completely to the coaching staff, as much as he might seem like an afterthought to some of us because he's played so little in the last couple of years since he's been drafted. They're still holding on some hope, I think, to Anthony Jennings. And I think you can throw him in there at the edge position along with Uche and Perkins at this point as well.
Yeah, I don't think he should be an afterthought. I think he's a talented guy. He showed a lot of talent at Alabama. Last year, it's not like he's played poorly. He was hurt last year.
Yeah.
He was their second most used linebacker his rookie season. Granted, it was 26%. They didn't really use linebackers, but they showed faith in him his rookie year. And then last year he was hurt. He couldn't play. He didn't play. Like, that's it. I don't think they'll rule him out. I don't think they've ruled him out. I don't think they should rule him out. I'm not saying he's a lock to make the team. I had him as my 55th player when I did my roster projections. You get 53 right. I had Trey Nixon as 54. I had Anthony Jennings as 55. He's right there on the bubble to me. You know, if they don't trade for Mac Wilson, I think he's probably on. If they, you know, I still think he can contribute. I still do. I'm still in on that one.
Eventually, I think the depth is something that they're going to have to think about. If they're going to stick to a lot of 3-4 looks, right? If they're going to have two outside on-ball linebackers at the end of the line, if you go into the season, Judon, obviously, Uche, Perkins, that gives you three. You kind of need a fourth guy, right? Because you think about backing up both sides sort of thing, right? And if you kind of need a fourth guy, and I think that Anthony Jennings is, unless they're going to go DeMarcus Mitchell, right? Unless he carves out a role as a UDFA somehow. It seems like Anthony Jennings just filling out that depth chart is going to be that guy, because Mac Wilson, McGrone, McMillan, Bentley, those are true off-ball linebackers. Like, those guys are not standing up on the edge, right? Like, that's not going to be roles that they're going to play. If you're going to need depth there, if you want depth there, Anthony Jennings is kind of your option, right? So I think that's kind of why they're giving him some run, because there's a chance that they might need him, and that's kind of where they're at with that position. Let's flip over back to offense. Look at wide receiver. Trey Nixon, he's the star of the spring, right? I mean, I wish that we could see a little bit of Trey Nixon already in pads so we could actually talk about this if it's real or not. But I want to talk about not necessarily whether it's real or not, because we're going to get to that in training camp and we still have to wait and see. But let's talk about it from where he plays and his position on the team. Clearly going to be a slot receiver. Yep. You love that vertical slot idea. I think he's somebody that can do that.
Yeah, we saw him do it in minicamp, running up the seam, one-handed catch over Jonathan Jones. I think that's, vertical slot, speed slot, whatever you want to call it. That's kind of his prototype. He played more on the outside in college at UCF, so that's more his bag. But just size-wise, in the NFL, that's going to be a little bit tougher for him versus in the slot. I think he can create some really interesting matchups. So, yeah, I buy it. I totally buy him as a modern slot.
Yeah, I love him as a modern slot too. He's not going to give you a lot more after the catch, I don't think. I don't think that's necessarily his skill set, right? And when you start talking about guys that do really well after the catch, you kind of think about the punt returners and people like Edelman and Welker and like those types of archetypes. That's not really Trey Nixon, right? He's a down the field receiver.
Right.
But he can give you explosive plays from inside, right? He can give you slot verticals. Ran a couple really nice corner routes during minicamp. That was kind of the route that he kept hitting on with Mac Jones, those little post corners.
Right.
That sort of look, I think, is a little bit different. I would have to
he's somebody too. I think he could be effective in the screen game. He's quick. He's not just fast. He's quick. He's got good agility. I think, the biggest issue for him, first off, he was hurt in college a good amount. And I don't think he realized how agile he was. Like, watching him out last year running routes and, trying to do it all at full speed and everything, he seemed lost. Yeah. He seems to have a much better understanding of his own physical abilities this year. That can go a long way. That, some college programs, they say, hey, you're fast, run. And they don't necessarily coach that part of it. The Patriots are huge on that part of it. Yeah. So he was 7th round pick, but I think there's a lot of room for natural development with him. Like you said, he's a deep threat, but I think he can be a screen guy too. And I think in time, in another year, he could turn into a bit of an intermediate guy.
Yeah, I think a good comp for him, and hopefully he pans out to be a little bit more consistent than Scotty Miller, but he's definitely more Scotty Miller than he is like Wes Welker, right? Like in terms of
he actually kind of reminds me of Chris Hogan.
Yeah, I could see that. I think he's faster than Chris Hogan. But yeah,
people didn't realize how fast Chris Hogan was. Chris Hogan was sneaky. He's faster, but Chris Hogan was sneaky fast. I think Hogan was bigger.
Yeah, I think listed height, I don't know, but in terms of he looks bigger, right? And we'll see.
Hogan 6'1", 210.
Yeah, I think Nixon's like just over 6 feet.
Oh, 6'1", 187. So
yeah, definitely thicker.
Yeah. But I like that. It looks a little similar to me. Chris Hogan, how he was used in New England, like give Trey Nixon that role.
Yeah.
I think he could contribute.
Mac Jones throwing vertical slot routes, he drops dimes, right? Like those touch throws where he has all that sideline to work with. That's why you love verticals from the slot so much, is because when you're inside the formation, it really gives the quarterback and the receiver a lot of room to run into, and the quarterback a lot of room for error with the throw, right? You can really get some air under it and drop it in the bucket. Whereas when you're on the sideline, you have the sideline as kind of another defender, right? You have to keep them in bounds. With the slot fades and things like that, it's much easier to drop those throws in. And Mac really throws some beauties when he's got guys that are either tight split, X receivers that are in tight, or just guys that are running straight verticals from the slot. He can really drop those on a dime. And that's what we saw with Trey Nixon. I don't mind the Chris Hogan comparison. I think back in the day when Deion Branch was manning the slot, there was a little bit more verticality to it at that point in time, right? He was a little bit more of that bursty up the field type of receiver than the jitterbug underneath the defense type. There's a lot to like about Trey Nixon in terms of what he can bring in his role in the offense. Let's hope it translates. It's pretty crazy, though. You mentioned last year at camp and what he looked like. Not only did he look lost mentally, but like physically, he just didn't look like an NFL receiver yet. It goes to show a year of development in an NFL strength program, working with the pro receivers and working with pro coaches and pro conditioning staff. What a difference a year can make for a guy like that. He just did not look like he was ready to be in the NFL last year. This year, it looks like a completely different human being.
Right. Yeah.
All right. Let's talk scheme. So our friend D22 here always asks this question, so I will get to it today, about why we haven't talked as much about the Alabama LSU spread system that Mac used at Alabama, that Joe Burrow runs a little bit of it in Cincinnati, and those types of things. Look, we've talked about it plenty. We just haven't seen the Patriots do it, right? Like until the Patriots actually do it on a football field, whether it's practice, whether it's mini camp, OTAs, or out there in an actual game, and we start seeing RPOs and we start seeing pre-snap motion and we start seeing some of these spread elements that he ran at Alabama, it's not that we're discounting it as a possibility, or I'm discounting it as a possibility. I just haven't seen them do it. So it's kind of hard to look at it and say that they're going to do it when they haven't done it. What we've seen out at practice, in the OTA practices and the minicamp practices, was the Shanahan stuff, was outside zone, was bootlegs, was moving pockets, was that type of thing. So if they were out there running RPOs and running Alabama spread, we would be talking about it, right? We would be saying they're running Alabama spread, or they're, kind of give hints or drop hints that that's what they're doing. I still hope that they do some of this. I still hope that this is something that they go to. We just haven't seen them buy into that fully yet. And I've heard some, rumors that Belichick has always been a little bit fascinated by the Shanahan offense and has kind of wanted to go towards the Shanahan offense for a while, but that was never McDaniels' thing, and that's not what they ran. So I think that there is some internal support behind going Shanahan style, but both of us would love to see them implement the Alabama offense here. Like that's what we've been clamoring for.
Yeah, that's what I want. Again, we can't talk about them doing it when they haven't done it. It's just not how anything works, but I'd love to see it. That'd be pretty cool.
Yeah, how many times have we said the word RPO or the phrase RPO here, and wanting them to put RPOs into this offense? I feel like a broken record. I tried to stop saying it because I used to say it so much, right? I mean, that's
right.
Really, even with the Shanahan stuff in there, some of Shanahan stuff, it's not, they don't major in RPOs in San Francisco, but they do it more than the Patriots did, right? And I think now with Trey Lance, they'll definitely do it more than the Patriots. So it's not that scheme is completely, you can't do it at all, right? Like I think you can do it some. And I'm interested to see if they do go that direction. I would love for them to go that direction, but I don't know if they're ever going to do that. I just don't. I'm not sure what it is. Maybe they just like don't believe in it. I don't know. Like I don't know why they don't like it. Maybe
Well,
it's
although for what it's worth, there was a report I think 2 weeks ago now that Bill O'Brien was in the building, kind of as a consultant for Bill Belichick at some point this offseason. So that's Bill O'Brien's offense. The offense we're talking about, we're dancing around, was Bill O'Brien's offense. Nearly, got a quarterback to the Heisman, nearly won national championship last year.
Yeah.
So maybe there's elements of it on the way. But
yeah, that's true. Bill O'Brien was in the building, as was Jed Fish. Jed Fish had.
Well, Arizona went 0-12 last year.
I know, but
talk about what
Fish
Jed
was on the
Fish is adding.
Patriots staff a few years ago. But before he came to the Patriots, he was with Sean McVay in Los Angeles. When they hired Jed Fish, I thought maybe that they would bring in some Shanahan stuff then, right? I thought that was kind of an inkling that they were going to do some Shanahan stuff, but that wasn't the case, at least when Jed Fish was here. Some other offensive coaching staff or scheme questions. What do you make if you have a take on this, Alex, of Nick Caley seemingly getting passed over here a little bit in terms of offensive responsibility, play calling? It seems like his name is completely gone away in terms of a potential play caller.
Yeah, it's a shame. I thought him and Troy Brown both didn't get their fair due. I thought those are two guys that been in the system for a while. Obviously, Troy Brown for years as a player first, and now as a coach. I would have liked to see them get a shot, and maybe they are. We're going off reports. We don't know what's going on behind closed doors, but it's funny. Everybody's complaining about how they kept it two in-house and they didn't really go with anybody outside or whatever, and it's all Bill's friends. I wish they kept it more in-house if they were going to go this route. If they were going to go this route, give me somebody who's been here. Give me Caley or Troy Brown. But I don't know, maybe in the future, maybe they know the setup they have now is a short-term setup. There's been, some nothing reported, but, speculation connected dots that maybe they're just buying a year and Bill O'Brien had to spend 2 years at Alabama or whatever it is. So, maybe, they didn't want to do that to Nick Caley. They wanted guys they knew they could just move out of those roles next year. But I thought Nick Caley and Troy Brown both deserved a shot.
Yeah, I did too. I would love to see Troy Brown have a lot more going on in terms of involvement, right? I just feel like he's a guy that was in the old system, but also understands where the game is kind of going and where it needs to go, right? Like, I think he understands how to make life easier on receivers, especially. You look at some of the things that they're trying to do with the streamlined terminology, with kind of dumbing down the playbook a little bit offensively. You have to think that maybe Troy Brown had a little bit of input in that, where he said, look, my guys just aren't playing fast, right? Like we're not playing fast enough. We're getting bogged down by overthinking things. Let's simplify it a little bit more. And maybe that is partially Troy Brown there a little bit. Nick Caley's another guy too that, you look at like Tom Pelissero, he puts out that list every year of like under the radar head coaching candidates for the future. Gerard Mayo's on it every year. This past year, Nick Caley was on it. So clearly a guy that other people think highly of. The Patriots blocked him from going to Vegas, right? I think Josh McDaniels wanted to bring him with him. The Patriots said no. So they clearly like the guy enough to keep him around. Eventually, maybe he does take on more responsibility. Maybe they're still waiting to kind of, I don't know, like break him in a little bit more or something, get him a little bit more experience. But it'd be interesting to say what happens there. All right. And let's see if there's any more questions before we turn it over to Celtics and Boston Sports Minute time. A lot of talk in the chat about Dak Prescott for some reason, Alex. I have no idea.
There's somebody commenting named Dak or something like that.
I have no idea where that's coming from. Okay. This question, I understand it's tongue-in-cheek, but I do think it's an interesting question just in terms of the depth chart at corner. The three Joneses, is there a chance we see all three Joneses? I know some people just want to see it to make the joke that there's three Joneses on the field or something like that. I don't even think it's that funny. But regardless, Jack Jones and Marcus Jones. Marcus Jones, we haven't seen at all, right? He's been the red non-contact jersey throughout the spring. isn't ready to go because of the shoulder injuries. We did see Jack Jones, though, and he looked pretty solid at times. I think he's still inconsistent up and down like any rookie would be at this point. But he showed enough to give some optimism. What are the odds that either of the rookie Joneses contribute in year one? Because we know that John Jones is going to be out there as long as he's healthy. He's going to play plenty. So it really comes down to the two rookies. I think we're pretty much in the school of thought at this point that Jack Jones is going to have a role as a rookie.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of how much it's going to actually be in terms of playing time.
Yeah, I think Jack Jones is going to compete for a starting outside cornerback spot. To answer the question directly, when we get all three on the field at the same time, I think week 18 against Miami is your best chance because Marcus Jones and Jonathan Jones play the same position. Generally, there's only one slot corner on the field at the same time.
Yeah.
So, strategically, it doesn't make a ton of sense to have them both out there. Now, John Jones plays some safety. So maybe that's how it happens. Maybe he goes back to safety. Marcus Jones steps in the slot. But I think the best bet would be week 18 against Miami. You get Jack Jones on the boundary. And then because they have so many good slot guys, Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, the Patriots decide to use multiple slot corners and they put Marcus Jones and Jonathan Jones out there at the same time. Now, the question is, can those three all get on the field somehow at the same time as Mac? That's probably some weird special teams trick play or something. That is going to take more time to analyze. But if this happens, I'm going week 18 against Miami.
Yeah, I'm not ready to get too excited about Jack Jones yet, but that would certainly make me feel so much better about this defense if Jack Jones turns out to be a player. I do like how he moves. Like, I think you look at the way that his hips, his feet, there's some of the things that you talk about with man coverage guys and being able to shut guys down as being able to stay glued and connected to your receiver and things like that. I think he has those traits. Like, I think he has those movement skills. I think he has that fluidity. I think the one thing that you looked at him in minicamp and you have to get him a little bit more up to speed on is, there's going to be some route details at the NFL level that, quite frankly, they just don't do at college level, where there's little fakes or little subtleties in the route that he's not anticipating as well as he needs to right now to really take the bull by the horns and be that starting outside corner. But that will come with time and with coaching. And the Patriots are really good, especially when they're coaching press man. They're really good at getting guys to study, getting guys to understand those types of things so that you're not reacting all the time out there. You don't want to be chasing. You want to be anticipating. You want to be in front of the game. I think that those are the things that will help Jack Jones a little bit. And that was something that JC early on in his career struggled with at times, and it kind of came on slowly for him as well. So that has to go back to film study habits, things that you're not necessarily doing in practice. It's not like Jack Jones is going back and watching Nelson Aguilar tape so he can get one over him next practice, right? Like, that's not really the idea here with these practices. So maybe they can help him out a little bit with that a little bit more. But in terms of movements, ball skills, things like that, I think he could play right away. And you talk to, some of the people, like we talked to, like Eric Gelko right after they drafted him, who worked out with him at the Shrine Bowl down there. And, there's people around the league that think that this guy was going to be drafted a whole lot higher if his college career goes differently. If he stays at USC as a 5-star corner in the Pac-12, and he doesn't have any of the off-field stuff that went on with him in college that caused him to transfer, I think it's a completely different ballgame for Jack Jones, and maybe he ends up being a top 50 guy, right? But it just didn't go that way for him, and he didn't have that kind of consistency. And I don't want to talk too much about the off-field stuff, but what Jack Jones had going on off the field is nowhere near as bad as what some other guys had going on off the field. The guy tried to get some Panda Express at 3 o'clock in the morning when he was in college, right? We're not talking about anything really too awful. So it'd be interesting to see if Jack Jones ends up being one of those guys where we say, oh, well, he's drafted in the 4th round, but if we redrafted, maybe he would have been a first-round pick or a late first-round pick or something along those lines.
Right.
All right. There's one more question in here. I'm going to find it quickly, and then we can move on to the Boston Sports Minute.
Is it the question of who our favorite Patriots players of all time were?
Oh, yeah. We can wrap it up on that one. But this is one more real question. No offense. And then here it is. Okay. 2 tight end sets. I think this is an interesting question. Are the Patriots still – they've obviously committed all these resources to Hunter Henry and Johnny Smith, right? That's where a lot of their money is tied up in terms of offensive skill positions. but are they still 100% sold on being a 12 personnel base? Like, is that the way that they want to be? Or do you see them once again, like last year, they've slowly started to realize that 21 with the fullback. I know they don't have a technical fullback on the roster right now, but Jonnu Smith can more or less serve as a fullback if they want to go back to some of those two back, I formation, strong eye type of things that they have done in the past. And 11 personnel, 3 wide receiver, was easily their most efficient and effective personnel grouping last year. And the 12 personnel stuff really faltered. It was not as successful as they wanted it to be. Do you still see them forcing it down everybody's throats that they're going to be a 2 tight end offense and trying to get this Hunter Henry and Jonnu Smith thing working?
Yes and no. If they're doing the Shanahan thing, I think they'll both be on. It's semantics. Is it 12 or 21? If Jonnu's on the field and he's doing the Kyle Juszczyk role,
right?
Is that a 2 tight end offense, or is Jonnu Smith now a fullback? However you want to cut it. I think they're both going to be very heavily involved. I think the two of them are going to be very heavily involved in the offense. I think you'll see a decent amount of snaps where they're both on the field. I don't know that it will look like traditional 2 tight end sets. Like this time last year, we're talking about, the Rob Gronkowski, Aaron Hernandez scheme. Like, I think that's probably not in the conversation anymore. But I do still think that there's going to be a lot of situations where they're both on the field.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And you talk about that Kyle Juszczyk role or using Jonnu as a little bit more of like an H-back or a move tight end instead of that traditional inline. That I think is really where they have to go with this if they're going to make it work. Is Hunter Henry is your traditional wide tight end. Jonnu Smith is a jack of all trades, Swiss Army knife type role. Whenever Jonnu is being an athlete, like whenever he's already moving into blocks or he's motioning across the formation and catching the football on the flat or running into space as a route runner instead of having to break down and really get in and out of a break. He looks so much better than when they try to make him into some of the, the more technically refined route runners and tight ends. They have to get him into that I'm an athlete type of role and just get the guy the ball in space, allow him to be an athlete and stop bogging him down with all the little technicalities. If you want to run like a precise stick route or if you want to run a Y option style play, like you have Hunter Henry for that, right? Like you have that tight end in Hunter Henry. Don't try to pigeonhole Jonnu Smith into a role where he doesn't belong. And I hope that that's one of the things that they kind of self-scouted and went back and looked at. And I think it probably will. It was. All right. So the chat, for some reason, is not letting me go all the way back, Alex. But somebody towards the very, very beginning of the show asked us who our favorite Patriots of all time were. I think, we're not old, so we're not going to go with Andre Tippett or John Hanna or anything right now, Alex. But I'll allow you to start. I'm sure you have a couple. So
I'm assuming we're doing besides Tom Brady, right?
Yeah, besides Tom Brady, yeah.
I mean, it's Drew Bledsoe. So I grew up watching play quarterback. All right, I'll go offense, defense. On offense, it's Drew Bledsoe. On defense, it's Ty Law. Peak Ty Law was the man. He just a bad dude. Like, you were not getting by him. I loved watching Ty Law. He had the swag too. Just like everything about him just screamed lockdown corner. So I'll go with those guys.
All right, I love Ty Law too, but if I'm going to say favorite Patriot non-Tom Brady category of all time, it's Randy Moss. I just never had.
He's up there.
I never had more fun watching the Patriots in my life than the 07 Pats and Randy Moss. Like, as great as Gronk was in his peak, and he was awesome. Like, don't get me wrong, but Randy Moss over the top was the most unstoppable play that I've ever seen the Patriots run, right? Like I've never seen anybody be more dominant at anything than Randy Moss running any sort of vertical route, right? Like it just was uncanny how good that guy was. Gronk running up the seam was close, but then they stopped doing it as much because he kept on getting hurt, getting taken out by the safeties going over the middle. So Randy Moss on the deep over, and he kind of brought the deep over to New England. They used to run it as a post. There's that clip of Belichick and him talking in A Football Life, I think in 09, where he says, instead of me running into the safety, like I'm just going to run across the safety, right? Like in those plays, it might have been even 07, I'm sure, when he brought that in. And he's just running away from everybody. Like a couple of those TD catches he had against the Dolphins, like stand out where there's like 3 guys trying to chase him. and he's just running away from the entire secondary. Randy Moss, favorite Patriot of all time, other than Tom Brady, that I've ever watched. I don't know if he'll ever be topped. I mean, that guy was just fantastic. Defensively, I'm with you on Ty Law. That he was awesome.
Some people in the chat said Rodney Harrison. Rodney Harrison is
A lot of
definitely
fun
up
too.
there. You're talking about a bad dude. Rodney Harrison, tone setter, leader, all of it. Rodney Harrison ruled.
I would also say that, Evan at the time, 9, 10, 11-year-old Evan in the beginning of the Patriots dynasty. Corey Dillon, when he got here in 2003, that guy was a G. Like, that guy was just fun to watch run the football. Loved Corey Dillon. But, yeah, Randy Moss. Vince Wilfork in the chat, too, obviously. Good shout there as well. Vince Wilfork was fantastic, too. Drew Bledsoe, this guy, Drew Bledsoe. Well, I don't know if you've ever fully explained to me in detail why you love Drew Bledsoe so much.
Because I don't know.
Take on this.
When I first started watching football, I was probably like 4 or 5 years old. I didn't totally understand the game, but it got through to me that the quarterback was a very important position. Drew Bledsoe was the quarterback of my favorite team. It just kind of clicked. And one of my first, not my first memory watching football, but the Steelers game, the 0-1 AFC Championship game. I just remember that was just a really cool game. I just have I had a great time watching that. And I just thought that really personified what that team was and all that. So, I mean, I was if it happened now, would Drew Bledsoe be my favorite player? I don't know. Probably not. When I was 4 or 5, yeah, he was the quarterback. I liked the Patriots. He was the quarterback. It was a no-brainer. And I just kind of stuck with it.
Yeah. I would say that my first distinct Patriots memory was obviously that 2001 run. I think that's when we started to get old enough where we could really store the memories, right? I remember watching games with my dad before that, but not the actual plays and the things.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. 2001, I got to give Troy Brown a shout out too, because his punt return against Pittsburgh in the AFC Championship game is easily when I try to think of my earliest football memories, that was a big one, right? Obviously, I have the Snow Bowl and everything that happened in the Snow Bowl as well, but Troy Brown's punt return, Teddy Bruschi, Julian Edelman in the chat, other good shouts there too for favorite Patriots of all time. I mean, if you want to go Julian Edelman, I don't think anybody will disagree, or Teddy Bruschi. Patriots tried to retire Teddy Bruschi's number, 54.
Yeah, he didn't want them to.
Yeah, didn't want him to. I don't think 11 ever gets retired because that's kind of a tricky one, right?
Well, Devontae Parker's wearing it now, so it's not getting retired. There you go.
Fair enough.
54 though. 54 should be a thing. This is more of a college football thing, but you should have to earn 54, right? Yeah. It should be. You can't show up and say I want number 54. The team says, hey, we're going to give you 54. And by the way, it can be linebackers or linemen. Brian Waters wasn't here long. Had a hell of a year when he was here, but I think 54 should have to be an 54 and 24 should have to be earned numbers.
Yeah. So at LSU, it's 7, right? 7's
right. LSU is 7. Texas does 0.
Yeah. Temple has the single digits. Those are the toughest players on the team.
Right. Yeah.
Hardest nosed guys on the team.
Every school does it a little differently, but that's So I 54 should have to be again, you got to be you can't just choose to wear 54. It's given to you.
All right. Are we eulogizing the Celtics yet today, Alex, or are we just talking about the Celtics? Which one are we going with on this Boston?
It's a little bit of both. It's a little bit of both.
I wish I was more excited for the Boston Sports Minute like I usually am, but today this one's a little.
We got good Red Sox news today. We can get to that in a little bit.
All right. Yeah. Let's start Celtics, then we can get to your Red Sox news. But where do we start with the Celtics? You start.
I mean, they had their chance in Game 4. Yeah. They had their chance. Wiggins played well, but I thought the stat line is very impressive. I don't think he played as well in the flow of the game as the stat line suggests. I thought the only true difference maker on the floor in that game was Stephen Curry. They were getting nothing from Klay Thompson. They were getting nothing from Draymond Green.
Yeah.
The Celtics should win that game.
Yeah.
I know Curry went off and had a historic performance, but the Celtics, it's kind of been what they've done all year. They've played team basketball. They've won as a team. And then it's all right, well, if they can't win the game Curry goes off, they better win the game where Steph Curry does nothing. And that wasn't the case either, obviously, the other night. It feels like they've hit a wall. It really does. And this is where I go back to, we might have breaking news here. Oh, we do. We have breaking news that is relevant to the Boston Sports Minute.
Oh, okay. What we got?
Bruce Cassidy, the Golden Knights.
Ugh.
Good for him. So
Good
they get
for
him.
Bruce.
Good for him. Yeah, good for
Good for
yeah.
Bruce.
Anyway, I think with the when it comes to the Celtics, I remember everybody saying after, they had the bad loss in Milwaukee and they still won in 7. Everybody said, oh yeah, well they choked that game, but they still won the series. It's fine. So it took 7. And then the same thing happening against Miami, right? So it took 7, whatever. Well, what does it matter if it goes 7? This is where it matters. The Warriors, I think, only went past game 5 once. I might be wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure they only went past game 5 once. The Celtics went to game 7 the last 2 series.
Yeah.
You're seeing that right now. The Celtics they're gassed. They're gassed, and I think the moment's getting to them. They're still a young team. We forget because Tatum and Brown have been together so long. It feels like that they've kind of maxed out, right? So I'm not saying it's over. Momentum in this series, in this playoffs does not exist, and they've been good on the road and all of that. I still, if they can just kind of find the adrenaline, I think it's simply an adrenaline rush. If they can get the adrenaline rush going, they can win. I think they're the better team, but it feels like this is where the experience of the Warriors and, having played fewer playoff games, you're starting to see that really be a difference.
Everybody that I've seen talk about the fatigue thing, because Ime Udoka threw out the fatigue thing last night, I think, but he was more talking about it in that game, right?
Because he was asked about it. So the question mentioned fatigue. He didn't bring up fatigue unprompted.
Yeah. So he was talking more about the fact that the bench didn't give him anything and they had to play the Jays for 40 plus minutes in that game. And they weren't really thrilled about that and thought maybe that's why they weren't as good in the fourth quarter. But everybody always responds, oh, they're 24 years old. Like, does that mean you don't get tired when you're 24 years old? Like, I get the young legs. Like, I get that that's a theory, right? I don't think that that's actually backed up by science. Like, playing a grueling playoff run like the Celtics have played is tiring no matter how old you are, right? And I think when they got into the beginning of the series with the Warriors, they were still riding high off the momentum of winning game 7 in Miami and getting over the hump and getting into the finals. Now that we're getting into games 5, 6, 7 of this Warriors series, hopefully 7, you start to see some of that real fatigue come out, right? And you start to see this run sort of take its toll on them. That's the biggest overarching concern with the Celtics. And I don't think any of the like little minutiae that we can talk about matter if they are truly just burnt out, right? Like none of the adjustments, none of the little things that they could do truly matter if they're just burnt out. But some of the things that have happened in this series, I tweeted out yesterday, everybody got mad at me per usual.
Well, because you're a green teamer now. You're besmirching the green teamers. There's your famous tweet. The green teamers or whatever they're called. When are they going to stop making excuses? Now you're the one saying the series isn't over. Now you feel good down 3-2.
Series isn't over.
Just pick a side. That's all anybody. We're just asking for consistency from you, Evan. That's it.
It wasn't that tweet that people got mad. I crossed sports, which I know you're not allowed to do. I crossed sports and I said that Andrew Wiggins' finals is a lot like when Chris Hogan would just go off in the playoffs because all the attention was going to Edelman and Gronk, right? And he was just left one-on-one with no help, and he was just free to run all over the field. And he was good enough that he was able to take advantage. He wasn't a complete zero. He was able to take advantage. Now, Andrew Wiggins is a better player than Chris Hogan. He's a better basketball player than Chris Hogan was a football player. The strategy is the same, though, right? Like the Celtics last night in particular, I thought, they're like face guarding Curry. Like they're guarding him like he's a wide receiver. They're trying to smother Klay Thompson. They're trying to limit Draymond Green's playmaking. How many times has Andrew Wiggins caught the basketball at the top of the key with one guy in between him and the basket and everybody else is all over the place, right? Like that seems like a still image I've seen like 100 times in this series. To Andrew Wiggins' credit, he's taken advantage. And the Celtics said we have to live with Andrew Wiggins. Like if Andrew Wiggins goes off, then we have to live with it. It just thinks that Andrew Wiggins is beating them, essentially, is what we're seeing in this series right now.
Yeah. But then it's not so much to kind of go back to what you were saying earlier. I feel like I feel like the calls are right. Like the strategy's right. Let Andrew Wiggins beat you. Don't let Steph Curry beat you. Like that's right. You just have to execute it. And that's what they're not doing. I think Ime Udoka's game plans are correct, but the game plan's only as good as the execution. That's what it's coming down to for me. I don't, you talked about adjustments and this and that. There's no adjustments at this point. Don't turn the ball over. That's the adjustment. I'm sitting last night, the press conferences end. I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to write. And, I should probably write about them saying turnovers were the problem. And it's like, well, how many times have I written this column? This playoffs? It's copy and paste at this point. So it's not adjustments or anything. Like, I know it sounds simple. I know it sounds kind of a-holy, but just play better. That's what it is at this point.
Yeah.
Don't turn the ball over. Make your free throws. That's it.
The turnover thing too is not to make excuses for the Celtics, but some of these turnovers are forced turnovers, right? Like the Warriors do play good defense.
There's too many unforced turnovers.
No, I don't
there's far too many unforced.
I think offensively, I've seen a lot of stats about the Patriots, the Celtics offense over the last 24 hours in these last two games. Turnovers is the big one, right? Like they're turning over the ball way too much. The other one is that they're getting into things way too late. Like you look at when the Celtics take shots versus when the Warriors are taking shots. So much of the Warriors' offense, and a lot of this is because of the turnovers, is in transition or in the early portions of the shot clock, right? Like they're getting good looks early on in the shot clock. The Celtics, how many times did the Celtics spin the ball back up to Jason Tatum or Jaylen Brown with like 7 seconds left on the shot clock and they just have to go one-on-one against somebody and score? There is no flow to their offense right now. And when there's no flow, I think that's when a lot of turnovers happen because you're trying to make plays with up against the clock, right? You're trying to make plays late in the shot clock. You're trying to make passes to get that one open look that you might get in a 24-second span. And I think they're playing sped up and it's forcing them into mistakes. So credit to the Warriors a little bit. I think, I think a lot of people are saying the Celtics are throwing this away, things like that. And it's not totally unwarranted, but I do think that you look at some of the things that the Warriors have done to slow down their process offensively and make them grind out possessions. This Celtics team wants to run. They want to shoot threes. They want to get out in transition. And the Warriors just haven't really let them do that. And I think that's a kind of a big problem with this series as well. Is it over, Alex? Are we pronouncing it dead, or do you give them a chance?
I still give them a chance, just the way these playoffs have gone. But I wouldn't put any money on it. I don't feel great about it. This isn't, and the whole thing with like, well, they haven't lost back-to-back games, and they came back when before last night, last night. Oh, they haven't lost back-to-back games so far in the playoffs, and they went to Game 7 against the Bucks. They were able to have this bounce-back success against those teams. This isn't the Heat. This isn't the Bucks. This is a different animal. Yeah. The Warriors are better than both of those teams. I think you can't necessarily lean on that to make a projection here.
Yeah, when we started talking about the Celtics, I said that if they're just gassed, if they're just burnt out, then nothing else that we say in the next 10 minutes matters. I still stand by that. And if they are truly just gassed and burnt out, then they're going to lose Game 6 and the series will be over, right? But something tells me that maybe they can reach deep and pull out one more win on their home court to push it to 7. I don't like their chances at all in Game 7 at that point. But get it to 7, see what happens, right? Like that's always the mantra when you're.
Wait. Hang on. I repeat all that real quick.
I think that they have a chance to win Game 6. Once we get to Game 7 in San Francisco, I think it's over. I don't think they win Game 7.
Okay, I thought you said if they don't win Game 6, you don't like their chances in Game 7. Which, if they lose Game 6, I really don't think they're going to win Game 7. I think that would be kind of a tough one.
I like their chances in Game 6. I don't like their chances of winning the series. How about that? Right? Because they're not going to. I don't like them winning Game 7. It's tough. It's been tough to watch them go up 2-1 and kind of throw this away. But I was trying to remember this last night. This is basically what happened to Phoenix last year too, right? They were up 2-1 in that series against Milwaukee, and there's some parallels there in terms of the youth and things like that. And they have the one veteran, Chris Paul. The Celtics have the one veteran, Al Horford, that's never won, right? But has been a decorated player, has never won. There's a lot of parallels between the Celtics and that Phoenix team last year. What's your Celtics news? Chris Sale related, Red Sox news. I'm assuming.
Yeah, just that. Chris Sale is going to come back. Supposedly they're going to get Eovaldi and Whitlock back soon too. Put Chris Sale in the bullpen. Don't start him. Don't do it. He'll get hurt in 3 weeks. They need help in the back end of the bullpen. I know people say, oh, well, you can move, Whitlock back to the bullpen. Well, you could also do that, but he's been fine as a starter. He hasn't been great, but he's been fine. Chris Sale's not a starter anymore. Don't do it. Don't try it. It's not going to work. Also, holy crap, do they look like idiots for not paying Rafael Devers? My goodness. His price is increased substantially since the beginning of the year.
He's got to be, if they make I know baseball's not like big on you have to make the playoffs to be the MVP of the league because they give the MVP to the league to a non-playoff guy all the time. But Rafael Devers got to be in the MVP conversation, right? I mean, his batting numbers are like top 5 in every meaningful category from everything I've seen. Yeah, he's having a fantastic season. Do you like Chris Sale at the back end of the bullpen, or do you like him as like the long relief guy? Because I kind of like Tanner Houck as the closer. Like I think Tanner Houck might be able to close, but maybe either way. Like if you have Chris
Sale, I agree with that. I think at least to start, you can't make Chris Sale the closer right away. You just can't. You can't after having not pitched in almost a year. You can't just put him in high leverage situations. So maybe down the road, if Houck starts to falter, I wouldn't rule out making him the closer. But in my mind, it's kind of what he did in the playoffs last year, where, or not last year, whatever year that was, where if you don't get a ton of length out of the starter, you kind of use him as the 5th, 6th, 7th inning guy, something like that. Maybe you pair him with Garrett Whitlock, where okay, we can get 4 with Whitlock and 4 from Sale, and then the closer if need be. Yeah, I'd make him that kind of middle inning stretch guy, 2 to 3 innings an outing, 2 to 3 outings a week. I think that's probably the best use for him right now.
Yeah, I love that. I think that would make their bullpen a whole lot better. I just want them to zero in on maybe it's Tanner Houck because I think he has good stuff and he's got the moxie for it to be a true closer. How many they lead the league in blown saves? I know that, right? And I think I saw a stat the other day. They have maybe more blown saves than actual saves. Like I think that's a real
stat. I don't think their team. They don't have any arms in the bullpen that are consistent enough to lock in a true closer. I think you have to be fluid with it because they don't have that guy unless they make a deal at the deadline. If they go out and get a real closer, then
it's not Hanso Robles. I'll tell you that.
No. It's if I see that guy point one more time. Anyway.
It's not Hanso Robles. All right. So a few things to tie this up here with the Patriots. Go back to Patriots here for a second. We did get training camp dates officially today, or the beginning of training camp. So the Patriots will open training camp on July 27th. July 27th through the 30th are the first 4 open practices to both the media and the public at training camp. They will have joint practices with the Carolina Panthers in Foxborough. They will have joint practices in Las Vegas with the Raiders before the preseason finale. Those are the things that have been announced. And outside the 2023 NFL Draft announced today in Kansas City, April 27th through the 29th. We're already thinking about the 2023 draft here on Patriots Beat. So, but the training camp dates.
It's only 317 days away, Evan. So,
wow,
again,
you just kind of that very. You don't even know how many days training camp is away, but you know how many days that.
48.
There you go. 48.
But no, 317. Evan, that's not like realistically. How many prospects are there going to be that you need to know? More than 317. So get started today. I pitched this to Evan off the air. I wanted we need content before camp, right? No, I'm serious. Do a prospect today, starting today. I'll do it with you. I pitched this to Evan before we came on the air because we need content before camp. I want to do obviously draft centric college football preview. I think, what else are we doing this time of year? But you only got 317 days, dude. So step on it.
There we go. I got to get going. All right. So training camp, July 27th. And right here on Patriot Speed, we'll be back on Thursday. We're going to debut a new segment. I'm going to speak it into existence. We've talked about it a little bit, but we're going to debut a Throwback Thursday segment every Thursday. Alex and I are going to go back and watch a sequence or a highlight of a all-time classic Patriots game from the Patriots dynasty, and we're going to break it down right here on Patriot Speed, talk about the ins and outs of the play, talk about the key players involved, and reminisce a little bit about some of the all-time great Patriot moments and Patriot plays for the last 20-plus years. So that is our Throwback Thursday segment. So we'll have that on Thursday. We'll probably field some more questions as well on Thursday, and we'll get Alex out of here so he can go cover Game 6 and watch the Celtics hopefully extend the series to Game 7. But until then, signing off for Alex Barth, I'm Evan Lazar. Thanks for watching, everybody, and we'll see you Thursday.